everybody, and welcome to our Author Nook. My name is Jordan H. Bartlett, and I am your host, author of Contest of Queens, Queen's Catacombs, and Queendom Come. And I am joined today with a former colleague, the writer, the bibliophile, the podcast and YouTube host of Ear Read This, and John Key Press editor, Ash Caton. Welcome.
Hey Jordan, great to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to chat today. So, Ash spearheaded the production of this, and I'm going to show it up close, this gorgeous edition of R.L. Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And he authored the introductory essay called Truly To, The Setting of Jekyll and Hyde. Both texts are what we're going to talk about today, which the theme being the duality and unity of man. And I'm so excited to chat about this. But before we jump in, Ash, please tell me a little more about yourself and what I mean by the John K. Press.
Oh, thank you, Jordan. Well, I feel like I can't live up to that introduction, but I'm a writer. I live in Edinburgh, as you mentioned. I'm a writer. I write poetry. I write plays. I'm actually writing a play or trying to produce a play at the moment that's about John Kay, who we can talk a bit more about if you want later on. And yeah, I'm the host of Ear Read This, which I semi-jokingly call Edinburgh's most powerful book podcast. I've been running it since 2018 now, which seems crazy. But yeah, so I have a podcast channel where I talk about different texts, and then a YouTube channel as well where I do shorter stuff, including at the moment a poem of the day. That's been my latest project. So I read out a poem every day and talk a little bit about it. And then I run John K. Press, which is a press set up at the bookshop I've worked at for a number of years, where we met. And the press publishes titles that have some kind of connection to Edinburgh, hence Jekyll and Hyde being our first one, but we have several more on the way, which we can talk about.
Yeah, no, it's so beautiful. And it's such an important tale, which we're going to jump into because The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is the first production from John Kay's press. And it is set in London, yet as you yourself mentioned, you are reproducing stories that are important to Edinburgh. So, what inspired you to choose this title for your first reproduction?
Well, there's kind of a very prosaic reason, which is that as you all know, we stock kind of classics in the popular trade term of the word classic. So Austen and Bronte and Dickens, we have a number of lines of those in the shop, and for some reason, both of the kind of flagship lines that we stocked didn't do Jekyll and Hyde. So it really began with me saying to my boss, it's madness that we don't have Jekyll and Hyde. We get asked about it all the time. Obviously, there's a lot of Jekyll and Hyde stuff in Edinburgh. People are always coming in asking for a copy, and we don't have any. So let's just make our own. It literally began like that. And in terms of why it's important to Edinburgh, Stevenson was born in Edinburgh, and he's one of the three big authors celebrated in the Writers' Museum, along with Walter Scott and Robert Burns. So it seemed like an obvious place to start, even if, as you say, the novel is ostensibly set in London.
Yeah, very, very cool. And I didn't realize that was just a necessity being the mother of invention, but what a lucky coincidence because it is really one of the most beautiful versions of this story. I find when you're trying to find them, they really focus on the hideousness of Hyde as the cover,
Yes.
which is not lovely to have in your purse when you're walking around. And
Yeah.
so I just love the very simple black and white, and then the lone figure in. And this is the street I used to walk every day going to work. So it's a lovely, lovely addition.
Yes, we should have said that too. That is the street on which the both shops, the shop that you were working in, the shop that I work in, are on. So yeah, that's literally an illustration of of where we met.
Yeah, yeah. You just can't escape your workplace, hey?
Exactly.
And so I want to talk about your essay, which is the introductory essay in this book. It is so fantastic. It helped me understand the story in a lot more depth, I found. Um, And in the essay, you explore how the setting of London in Stevenson's work is distinctly Edinburgh coded. So, what does this mean, and why is it significant to the interpretation of the story itself?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's important to say it's not an original observation by any means. People have been pointing this out for years. So I'm following the footsteps of people like Clayton Meeker Hamilton, G.K. Chesterton, and an Edinburgh writer called Murray McLaren. Not necessarily in that order. But the way they have talked about it, I'm not sure if this is deliberate or not, but they've made it sound somewhat conspiratorial. Murray McLaren recounts talking to Stevenson fans and talking about his theory that, it's Edinburgh if you look closely, and they respond, "Oh, of course it's Edinburgh. How did I not notice this before?" And Chesterton as well has a line that's something like, "You get the dawning feeling that the plot ostensibly unfolding in London is at the very same time happening in Edinburgh." I don't think they're deliberately giving off this impression, but it does leave you with the sense of a trick being played on the reader, that Stevenson's doing this in a kind of playful way. I'm not really sure if that's the case. I think what if we can interpret something from it, it's that the oppositional tensions at the heart of the book spring from Edinburgh, and with them they bring a lot of aesthetic detail and texture down to London. So aspects of Edinburgh's architecture and climate are described in ways that are very reminiscent to how Stevenson describes Edinburgh elsewhere in other books. And we can talk a little bit about some of the personalities he might have been inspired by in Edinburgh as well. And there's things like the names. So, like Jekyll, Stevenson knew a Scot called Walter Jekyll, although the Scottish pronunciation is Jekyll, as nerds like to point out and correct. Although I think it's one of those names where it's just a lost cause. Anyone
Mhm.
saying, it's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I think it's pedantry at this point. Yes, it's correct, but everyone knows it as Jekyll. Um, so Stevenson knew that Edinburgh was this sort of hive of duality. He said that the whole city leads a double existence. So it's not so much an interpretational point, but what I find interesting with why he sets it in London, it's more of a structural point, more of something to do with the operation of the plot. Had he set it in Edinburgh and had, let's say, Hyde scuttling away from respectable Newtown into disreputable Old Town,
Mhm.
it might have made everything a little bit more obvious. It might have given away this most famous of twists rather too soon, to have it all set in a city that's divided into old and new, and potentially good and bad as well, gentility and squalor. I think people might have seen the twist coming. Whereas if you set it in a foggy, more homogeneous city, it comes as more of a surprise, I think.
Totally. And I always think of, man, when this book came out, how did people react? Because we are looking at this book from the point of view of most of us have seen Fight Club, most of us have seen like The Incredible Hulk, most of us have seen all of these iterations of this character. Even Bugs Bunny had a really funny episode where he had a Jekyll and Hyde character going on. So
Mm.
even if you haven't read the book, you know basically the gist of it. But when this first came out, what ripples of shock would have followed? I can't even imagine. And I think setting it in London, it makes it almost like an every city issue. And then
Mm.
we have this character, Jekyll, and I always think, man, he had two very close friends, and they kept talking about we're old friends, we're the oldest friends, we've known each other forever. And they had no idea that Jekyll had that Hyde character within him at all. And so it just really, both of those things in my mind just lend itself to this concept of, oof, this is so relatable. This is could happen to anyone, could happen to any city. And it's not that Jekyll is this freak and outsider who has a very rare condition of just having malice within him. He's a respectable, stand-up person in society, like most of us are, and he was just capable of pulling that badness, evilness out.
Mm.
Hmm.
Definitely. And I think Stevenson presents the other characters around him, all of whom are male. They're all sort of, roughly comparable to Jekyll, almost as if they're dealing with similar things, but in a rather more healthy way. There's a lot of it's all very covert. Nothing's fleshed out, but you get the impression, even from the very first sentences that are about Utterson, you get the picture of a rather confused, enigmatic figure. You're conscious of things that might be going on that are out of view. But Utterson is a functional, well considered person, as is Jekyll. But Jekyll has this whole other thing going on. So I think you're right. I think it's not sort of those different adaptations that you talk about, Fight Club or The Incredible Hulk or Werewolf Stories or whatever. They've all like cast a retrospective way to read Jekyll and Hyde back, which doesn't really apply. It's not a sort of coin flip werewolf thing. Good guy
Hmm.
turns into a bad guy. I hear that every single day, obviously working in the shop. Someone comes in, looks at the cover and goes, yeah, I think it's like there's a good guy and he turns into a bad guy. And you always feel like, well,
Yeah,
sort of,
actually,
but not really. Yeah, actually,
yeah.
I'll just be really annoying. Let me ruin your morning for you. Um, it's not that. It's someone who's trying to basically divide himself up and put neat little fences around the different parts of himself and isolate the
Hmm.
bits he doesn't like.
Yeah, and because we get, so at the very end of the book, we get Jekyll's perspective finally. And this is after all of the people who have been affected by Hyde have just reiterated it's a deformity, this figure. Like something about him just like raises my lizard brain heckles, and I can't get close, or I can't describe what the deformity looks like because he still kind of looks fine, but it's a deformity of the soul that my soul is reacting to. So we finally get Jekyll's perspective at the very end of the book. And this episode is going to be full of spoilers. If you haven't read the book, that's on you. It
Where have
has
you
been
been?
out for a while. But we get to the end of the book, we get Jekyll's perspective, and what I was struck by is that he has so much love and excitement and thrill and reverence and fatherly affection for Hyde, and he doesn't push him away. And I think that's one of the most haunting elements of this story is that we're not dealing with good versus evil. It's not Jekyll good, Hyde evil. We're dealing with a very complex study of will and strength of will against pure, unbridled passions and evil. And that's where maybe we connect with it more because we can, as people, push evil away and be like, that's evil. I don't want that. But we can all relate to having a moral weakness where we know something is wrong, we know something is bad, and we still entertain it. Even if in the modern day it's just, I know I shouldn't be scrolling as much on my phone, but I do anyway. So
Mm.
what are your thoughts on this story as an exploration of man's strength of will rather than man's evil nature?
Well, I'm totally in favor of reading it that way. I think right until the end, to that amazing final letter that you've described with Jekyll giving his version at last, he's still, I think, being evasive. So that famous bit where he talks about, being a bit of a father to Hyde, and Hyde was being an indifferent son to him. Even that's a little bit evasive because it's still suggesting that the two are kind of independent entities and that Hyde is behaving like a wayward son. It's like that's him. You're talking about yourself. So it's all very well saying, Jekyll is, Jekyll saying I'm very sympathetic towards my son Hyde. It's like, of course you are. Everyone's most sympathetic about themselves. Um, so yeah, I think the whole thing springs out of I think the thing that Stevenson realizes so well about the whole issue of duality is that people will put a lot more time and effort into obscuring the unpleasant sides of their personality than confronting them. And by the time you get to that point in the novel, you realize that the tendency to hide, pun entirely intended, may turn out to be kind of where all of the trouble actually begins. In other words, that man isn't necessarily born with this bad good duality sort of baked in from the egg, but rather he starts to fracture when uh, he starts to arbitrarily compartmentalize himself and insist on these boundaries and splitting basically a unified self into bits they like and bits they don't like, bits they are happy for people to see and bits they would rather remain, hidden, buried, or whatever. And Jekyll tries to have it both ways. He tries to have, this little secret drawer where he gets to indulge in whatever he's indulging in, and then maintain a totally spotless record as Jekyll. So yeah, I mean, I really do think that the strength of will reading is really powerful because much like with the Edinburgh London thing, I don't necessarily think there's a kind of secret key to Jekyll and Hyde. Stevenson is very vague about what just not Stevenson's, Jekyll's peccadillos are, whatever it is he likes to get up to as Hyde. And so people have, obviously speculated, and it got kind of, when it first came out, I think it was a couple of years before the Whitechapel murders and Jack the Ripper. And so the story of Jekyll
Oh.
and Hyde, yeah, so if you watch like film versions, it's often mangled together with, that's a horrible use of that word, but
Yeah.
it's combined with the stories of Jack the Ripper. Jekyll's often, in the Hammer movies or whatever, creeping off to murder prostitutes as Hyde. But actually, Jekyll himself, if we can trust Jekyll, of course, which maybe we can't, he says, my vices are the kinds that another fellow might have sort of cheerfully talked about openly, but I had this sort of morbid fear of them, so I hid. So I think it really is a sort of case of not being able to handle things you don't like about yourself, not being able to get your indulgences in check, whatever they are. I think, yeah, a modern adaptation, it would be really funny to see, not funny, it would be really interesting to see like someone's guilt about social media use or something. I really think like a compelling reading of Jekyll and Hyde is that it starts with something that minor. There's this whole
Hmm.
disproportionality with the story. It's like something that's not that terrible a crime out of shame and guilt, like completely disproportionate, you know, sense of guilt and secrecy has sort of escalated into the fact that into the point where you literally do commit murder in trying to hide what is not actually that much of a big deal.
That is so true because also if we're taking what Hyde gets convicted of and what Jekyll admits to, really the two main crimes is the one we first open with where he hits a young girl with his carriage and rides on. But the murder only happens because Jekyll decides, I'm not going to indulge in Hyde anymore. I'm going to be a stand-up citizen. I think he had that shock where he woke up as Hyde, even though he went to bed as Jekyll, and he thought, oh, we got to rein this in. But he slips up. He's like, I just want one more dalliance. It's going to be fine. And I think the quote is like, the raging beast emerged because Hyde had been so trapped and pushed down and shamed.
Mm.
And
He
that's
came out
when
roaring.
came out roaring. That's the
Sorry.
line. Yeah, yeah. He
Yeah.
came out roaring, and so that old man explains some, exchanges some pleasantries with him, and he beats him to death with a stick, like totally unprovoked, not even worthy of a growl. And it is. It's him trying to repress just an aspect of his nature that leads to these extremes where he wouldn't have got there if he had just, you know, I don't know, shoved someone
Yeah.
accidentally down the street and not worried about the fact that he's an upstanding citizen who shoved past an older lady. Not the best
Yeah.
thing, but not murder.
Yeah, and it's that thing of trying to exercise control over something you're not in control of. That's another reason why I think the self-control and the willpower reading is really strong. First of all, the novel is full of drink. Like there's a really, I think say in the essay, but Nabokov said that there was a sort of deliciously winey flavor about Jekyll and Hyde. And obviously, it revolves the actual vehicle of Jekyll's transformation is drinking a liquid. But there's also this the winey colors and references to old bottles of wine as well. There's a lovely line about the acids in a bottle of wine changing. And I think, when you think about the bit you've just described, where, okay, I was indulging a bit too much in Hyde and it kind of got out of control. And I woke up one morning, I didn't know who I was. I mean, you can immediately start to see the kind of analogy to like overindulgence of another kind, perhaps of a kind of more boring and universal kind.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Very cool. And so where can
Yeah.
we find you online? Where can we find these updates? And where can we find the air read this podcast? Well, YouTube, obviously.
Yeah, so that's probably where I'm most active, which is earread this on YouTube. I put all my podcasts there. I definitely shout about the books. So whenever the new ones come out and arrive, I'll be holding those up and talking very excitedly about them, doing some readings or whatever. And then I also do shorter stuff, little book chat content, and these daily poems that I've been doing. Um, I also have a Substack where I write book reviews, which is Ash Caton on Substack. And then the bookshop, I should mention, does have an Instagram, so John Kay's shop. And they'll not only be posting about the books, but you'll actually be able to order through them. So that might be worth pointing out as well if anybody does want a copy of Jekyll and Hyde or any of the others.
Yeah. And then
Mm.
I have mentioned, we've talked about the essay you wrote in the beginning of this novel. It's
Mm.
phenomenal. Is that anywhere or is it something that is exclusive to the book?
It's exclusive to the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got to get your
Yes.
copy. And no
It's
freaky hide pictures, so you got a twofer.
Yeah, exactly. It's a classic tale of duality, I'm afraid. They're all contained within the same unit.
Yes, yeah. And I wanted to read that quote before we wrap up because you do such a good job. So you mentioned Chesterton wrote that the real stab of the story is not the discovery that one man is two men, but that the two men are one man, which
Mm.
is stunning. Good
Yes,
old
isn't it?
Chesterton. But I love what you say to expand on that, which is about the idea of London versus Edinburgh setting. So you said instead of Edinburgh, Stevenson chose a setting of relative homogeneity. Encountering the pair in London and its fog, we are stopped from discerning by neat opposition what Stevenson would prefer to be understood in terrible unity. Chills.
Mm.
Just stunning. Because at the end of the day, trying to find I mean, you can never summarize something like Jekyll and Hyde in one sentence, but as you mentioned before, Jekyll is Hyde. He talks about like, oh, he did this, he did that, my son. But Jekyll is Hyde, and I think that's the horrifying truth of it is you can't put that over there. They are one.
Mm. The neatest trick he does is give him a name. He
Yes.
never explains why. That's one of the, uh, eternal mysteries of the novel that people love talking about. Where does Edward Hyde get his name from? Jekyll just starts calling him that in his letter.
Mm.
Um, he's Jekyll. It's just the whole trick is pulled off by assigning different names to things, and also people's willingness to believe that, or unwillingness to believe that the two are the same. They would prefer to think. I mean, again, their language is very euphemistic, but it sounds like they are beginning to think that maybe Hyde has something on Jekyll and is blackmailing him. Who knows what that is? Could they be? People have written essays suggesting that it's a kind of homophobic thing where Jekyll maybe has a young male lover who's now holding him to rights and,
Oh, yeah.
trampling him. Um, or is it a, opium addiction or yada, yada, yada. But people will, of themselves, invent stories that keep these two people separate before they comprehend the truth.
Yes. And even in Jekyll's letter, honestly, I just love that last chapter. But in Jekyll's
Mm.
letter, he says something to the effect of, um, I say he because I cannot accept that Hyde is me. But if you read closely, he slips up several times and either uses like we did this, or he talks about how our memories are the same, but the way we go about life is very different. And I just keep thinking, memories are what make a person. No, you are Hyde. Stop hiding behind that
Mm.
persona.
Exactly. Yeah. No,
Hmm.
he makes a complete mess of it. He
Yeah.
can't keep. I mean, in fairness, who could? Like, if you started doing that, it must be like kind of really intense method actors.
Yes.
Maybe old Richard Mansfield had this problem. But keeping track of who's who and who you were on that day must be a real issue if you have like a second personality
Yeah.
that you've invented. But basically, it's all evasion. It's all Jekyll's way of, you know, just mitigating if he can't totally avoid the blame being
Mhm.
directed to himself.
Yeah, and not taking accountability while also making sure that if he disappears, Hyde is in his will and gets all of his belongings and can continue on as he does. I'd like to
Mm.
believe that where the name Hyde came from was that Stevenson really wanted to make that wonderful, terrible pun. If he is Mr. Hyde, then I shall be Mr. Seek from the lawyer who's looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really goofy that bit, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's
It's yeah.
it really feels like, they have that saying, authors need to kill their darlings. It feels like
Mm.
that was the darling that maybe should have met the gallows, and Stevenson couldn't let it go. And I'm glad he didn't because it is wonderful.
It is, and it sort of fits like the dry lawyer, you know.
Hmm.
It's a real groaner, but at the same time, if you imagine the lawyer saying it, Utterson saying it, you can sort of you sort of imagine him looking around at the room like, what do you think? You just
Yeah,
that
or doing
came
this.
off the cuff on that bit. Yeah.
Yeah,
A guy who doesn't make many jokes.
no. And he probably
You know.
practiced it that evening before and
Yeah.
tried it
In
out.
the mirror.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, this has been such a treat. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. It's been great.
Oh, just wonderful. I could chat about Jekyll and Hyde for ages. It is such a delicious novel, and it's also very short. So if you're wanting to get into the
Yeah.
classics, if you're wanting to really like feel, oh, so many feelings, do read it. Listen to the audiobook. It is available everywhere. It is definitely available at the John Key Press. And then you get the beautiful essay, which, like I said, it really helps with going deeper into the story of Jekyll and Hyde. For listeners and viewers, thank you for joining our chat. And if you liked what you heard, please take a minute to rate and follow this podcast or share with a like-minded friend. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. I release new episodes once a month with no set date, so the only way to not miss anything is to make sure you're following. However you wound up here, I hope you are well and living magically.